You ever witness something so petty and outrageous that you can't decide whether to laugh or scream? That's exactly what ran through my head as I tightened the final bolt on a 6-foot-tall wooden fence, one that now neatly split the lakefront in two, slicing through grass, dock, and water like it was drawn by a legal scalpel. Behind me, a dozen stunned neighbors stood speechless, watching this audacious structure materialize right down the middle of what used to be shared paradise. Across the fence, Margaret, cousin to our infamous HOA president Karen, stood frozen, her jaw slack, as her luxury lounge chairs and half-finished jet ski ramp were now permanently marooned behind a wall of lumber. What led to this surreal standoff started 5 years ago, when I purchased my dream home in Willowbrook Estates, drawn in by the promise of deeded lakefront access. The property came with shared usage rights to a sandy beach and a community dock, both of which were central to my family's summers. Every weekend, my kids and I would fish, swim, and play by the water until sundown. That lakefront was more than just a view, it was a part of our life. Then came Karen Fitzgerald. 6 months ago, she ascended to the HOA presidency and quickly transformed into the dictator of our little paradise. She wielded her newfound authority like a battle axe, implementing fines for trivial things like grass height, banning wind chimes under the guise of noise control, and requiring written permission to plant any flower not pre-approved by her committee. But the real rot set in with her web of favoritism. Her brother-in-law somehow became the neighborhood's official landscape inspector, paid, of course. Her childhood friend secured the pool cleaning contract. And when her cousin Margaret flew in for an extended stay, it seemed the HOA rules no longer applied. I first noticed something was off when Margaret began setting up an entire backyard resort on the shared lakefront. Not just a chair and a cooler, no, she rolled out heavy-duty loungers, tiki torches, a booming speaker system, and started building a private jet ski ramp. The whole setup completely obstructed the lake view and blocked access for anyone else. I tried to address it civilly, introducing myself and politely pointing out the shared nature of the space. Margaret looked at me like I'd interrupted her coronation and informed me that Karen had granted her exclusive rights to that half of the lakefront, since I only used it on weekends. She waved a sheet of paper in my face, a so-called easement reassignment from the HOA, and advised me to file a complaint if I had a problem. Curious and skeptical, I inspected the document. It claimed the HOA had unanimously voted to give Margaret exclusive access for the duration of her stay, citing better community resource management. A bold claim, considering 2 board members were out of state during that supposed vote. Something about the whole thing reeked. I contacted the city planning office and county property records. Unsurprisingly, both confirmed that the lakefront was deeded to specific properties, including mine. And no HOA vote could override that without formal consent and legal procedure. Karen's reassignment was, in legal terms, a joke. I presented this information at the next HOA meeting. Karen's response? Pure theater. Her face turned beet red, her grip on the podium tight enough to leave fingerprints. She shrieked that the HOA had recently amended its bylaws to allow full control of all waterfront decisions. She claimed anyone who challenged the board would be fined $500 per day. She even presented another conveniently undocumented bylaw amendment allegedly approved in a mystery meeting no one remembered. Meanwhile, Margaret's lakefront empire expanded. Music blared from sunrise to sundown. Her guests trashed the beach. The jet ski ramp stood like a wooden middle finger to the neighborhood. And when my 8-year-old daughter tried to walk to the water for her morning swim, Margaret physically blocked her and declared the space private property. That moment, seeing my daughter walk back with tears in her eyes, was the final straw. I spent the following week buried in paperwork. As a contracts lawyer, this was my home turf. I reviewed my home purchase agreement, the property survey, the HOA charter, and decades of meeting records. What I found was ironclad. Not only was the lakefront deeded specifically to my lot, but the HOA charter explicitly stated it had no jurisdiction over deed rights. Any interference would open them up to personal liability. I drafted a notice and sent it certified to both Karen and Margaret. They had 72 hours to clear their junk from the shared space or face legal action. Unsurprisingly, they didn't take it seriously. The next morning, Karen arrived at my doorstep in full theatrical mode. Margaret in tow, along with a man she introduced as their lawyer. He looked like he'd studied law by binge-watching legal dramas. They tried it all: threats, bribes, bizarre legal theories. Karen offered to waive my HOA fees for a year if I just let it go. Margaret proposed a shared schedule. She'd take Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The so-called lawyer mumbled something about squatters' rights, which earned him an eye roll and a polite invitation to leave. The 72 hours ticked by without change. Margaret, if anything, dug in deeper, expanding her setup, beginning construction on a permanent shade pavilion. So I launched Phase 2. I hired a licensed surveyor who marked the exact boundaries of the shared lakefront. As I suspected, the area was evenly split down the middle. And Margaret's party zone sprawled well across both halves. Armed with the survey, I visited the local hardware store and ordered enough fencing to make a serious statement. The clerk's eyes widened as I explained where it was going. Word spread fast. By the time I got home, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. When people asked if it was true that I was building a fence, I calmly replied, "Just marking property lines." At sunrise the next day, I was at the lake with a full fence crew. We had permits, the survey, and a mission. The fence extended in a perfect line from one end of the beach to the other, even slicing the community dock clean in half. It was both practical and poetic. Margaret emerged right as the panels blocked her access to her beloved loungers. Her coffee mug shattered on the deck. Karen arrived shortly after in a bathrobe and foam curlers, followed closely by half the neighborhood. The meltdown was spectacular. Karen screamed accusations of vandalism, trespassing, emotional distress, even identity theft. She called the police, who reviewed my paperwork and left. She called city code enforcement, who found no violations. She even tried contacting higher authorities, escalating from City Hall to, I suspect, the Pentagon. Meanwhile, Margaret's elaborate setup was now hilariously dysfunctional. Half of her jet ski ramp was useless. Her speaker system split down the middle. The shade structure? Unusable. Its posts standing awkwardly on both sides of the fence like props in a play. That evening, the emergency HOA meeting was jam-packed. Karen had circulated flyers declaring me a neighborhood menace, but instead of rallying support, it backfired. Other homeowners had been quietly doing their own research. A retired judge named Tom Harrison stood up first and calmly laid out the legal violations committed by the board. Sarah Chen, whose flower garden had been bulldozed by one of Karen's projects, followed with her findings. One by one, neighbors joined in, exposing Karen's corruption. Then Margaret's husband showed up. He took one look at the fence, his furious wife, the legal circus, and made a quick decision. They were leaving. As he supervised the dismantling of Margaret's setup, neighbors overheard him muttering about how Karen had dragged them into an expensive mess. Karen's final gambit came when she tried to declare an executive order to have the fence torn down, but the board's attorney finally broke his silence. He stated flatly that Karen had overstepped her authority, exposed the HOA to legal action, and needed to be removed. The vote was immediate and unanimous. Karen was out, but that wasn't the end. The board voted to press charges. Karen had funneled HOA funds toward Margaret's bogus easement paperwork and had been skimming from the landscaping budget to pad her brother-in-law's paychecks. 3 months later, Karen stood before a judge, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The verdict? Guilty. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution of $47,000 to the HOA. As the judge's gavel fell, Karen crumpled in tears. And as for me? I still sit by the water some mornings with my coffee in hand, admiring the perfectly straight fence and the quiet calm of a lake restored. If seeing Karen's HOA drama fall apart gave you life, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable neighborhood showdowns. Trust me, the next one might be even crazier.